So, hi everyone. We actually did a last-minute change. I think the program mentions someone else from SentinelOne, but they asked me because I'm visiting from the US to come up from London. I fly back to New York tonight. My name's Yonni. I run EDR and XDR for SentinelOne, meaning strategy, product management, product development, corporate development. If there are any questions along the way, feel free. I will admit that I was a season ticket holder here for 4 years, so this is completely surreal to be talking about XDR at Old Trafford. Just out of interest before I start, how many people have heard of the magic acronym XDR? Cool, okay, so it won't be completely new. In general, this presentation isn't very biased towards SentinelOne. I just did it at a Gartner conference yesterday morning, so we're supposed to be neutral. XDR for SentinelOne isn't a product. It's not a specific thing on our price list that you either have or you don't. It's a function of conversations that we've had with customers and partners from Fortune 10s to much, much smaller global customers. And it's a function of the pain points that, in all honesty, will likely sound very, very generic on the slide, and pretty much every cybersecurity vendor talks about them. But it is an attempt on many vendors, and us specifically, to try and deal with all of those challenges in a way that hasn't really succeeded yet. Whether that's the fact that every type of enterprise and smaller are using more and more types of products, mobile, servers, endpoints, clouds, and so on and so forth, and nothing has yet managed to solve security for all of them. With more surfaces come more vendors. There are good vendors, there are amazing vendors like SentinelOne, but at the end of the day, someone has to deal with 3, 4, in some cases, 20 different security vendors. And everything is usually manual, and there aren't enough people, and the threats are getting better and faster and stronger and more complicated, and the expectation to not just stop something, but attribute it to what it is and where it came from and what it affected is now something which is much more commonplace than just at Bank of America or Barclays. Like, everyone is now expected, whether for the purpose of insurance, hey Paul, or for simply the fact that risk has grown. And that requires a different type of approach to dealing with it. So why XDR? Why now? XDR, other than being a very cool letter X, is an attempt to find both a platform and an approach to dealing with those problems. Not that there aren't products that have tried. There are SIMs, there are SOARs, there are many other amazing acronyms that have attempted to say, you give us all of your data, give us all of your APIs, and we solve it. But it clearly hasn't worked yet. If it had, XDR wouldn't be here. Every single one of you would have plugged all of your products into a SIM, bought a SOAR, and it all magically goes away. You have picture-perfect clarity across every single type of sensor. You have automatable or even automated response across everything, but that's just not working. There are more and more threats that are exposed to everyone here that traverse multiple types of surface, that require insight for more than one product. And that's really where an approach to XDR, and if XDR is done well, it can help. But when we talk about what help is, sort of helping you deal with the massive number of tools that you may have, helping deal with the fact that you're not able to respond effectively, one could say that maybe that help means lots of products. it could be endpoint, it could be EDR, it could be network products. So, but that's not the answer. The answer to the problems isn't a product that can say that it's every single other product combined. Even though many security vendors do talk about a solution as a sum total of products, but they're not focusing enough on how it's actually measured, what the actual outcomes that can help you, be it if you have a security team of one that also does IT, or if you have a security team the size of AT&T's security team, which is about 350 people. And the irony is that the outcomes that you're all looking for are the same. In a perfect world, it would be a single pane of glass that helps you do cybersecurity better. Sadly, most of that usually translates into a glass full of pain. And that's because the many companies that are talking to you about how to solve it are a function of 15 different acquisitions, maybe, that they've all plugged them together on the website. It looks amazing. They have mobile and endpoint and network and email and clouds and God knows what else. But that doesn't translate beyond the architecture and maybe a really nice single point of contact who sold you all of those things. From an analyst perspective, that's not actually making things better. Now, there are many analysts and people hypothesizing about what XDR is. In all honesty, all of them completely contradict each other. So I'll show you a few. There are various people at Gartner and Forrester and beyond saying that XDR has to have EDR, or XDR is actually a SIM but slightly evolved. And you should all make up your own minds about what it is. But this is actually where it starts translating into something that, if you would like to start evolving your approach, this is actually something that you should, whether it's you coming up with the solutions yourself or you forcing a vendor to prove to you that they have something that's helpful to you beyond a cool acronym and a nice logo. Does this thing that they are calling XDR help you to detect, investigate, and respond faster? And if they're saying that it does, have them prove it. Does it do so by correlating alerts into fewer? Does it do so by letting you automate more things? Does it do so by various other means? But if they can't prove it, and if they can't prove it in a real-life situation that is actually pragmatic, then it's nothing. And you also need to be careful from someone telling you that they have a magic capability that, without mentioning it, if you staff it with 6 people 24/7, you'll be able to build this incredible unicorn of a playbook that has 67 steps, and it can automate everything. And that doesn't mean that if you have the people, you can solve a lot of this. That's why, for example, the Fortune 10 don't need XDR. Between wherever all of their cyber data is, and between all of the automation that the 50 people that they've assigned to it can do, they're doing a lot of this. They're correlating across different cyber products. They are automating across different cyber products. They are using the insight from one to attribute a threat that another triggered. The reality is, though, that that's why it's beyond most people's means. And also why, unlike when EDR came into the world as a sort of next generation or one level ahead of what prevention was on endpoints, it was mainly focused at the most advanced, most mature companies because it created a whole new problem statement for them. What do I do with all of this data? I know that prevention isn't enough, and I want to answer who, what, why, where, when, how, But most companies, when EDR came into the world, so around 2006, 7, the only companies that adopted it were very advanced. Ironically, XDR actually solves a pain one level below that. XDR is something that everyone recognizes a problem. There are too many products, there's not enough insight, they aren't able to respond quickly enough, they don't have someone with 15 years of Splunk experience. But they can't solve it with a SIM and a SAW, because if they could, I wouldn't be in this room and you'd be talking about something else and not D and R and X, because that's clearly something that is trying to help one level below a customer that can staff it and thus solve the problem. So XDR isn't just about doing detection and response better, it's also about reducing cost. Can you achieve a viable solution with people that have fewer years experience, or with fewer people, or from a technical perspective with a lower cost to taking in all of your data? Not that that's a necessity, but it's definitely an option. And that's also something which isn't always the primary consideration of a enterprise that has 100,000 employees and a 1,000-person security team. That's not what they're optimizing for. The rest of the world is, or at least balancing between the aspect of cost and security. We talk a lot about there not being enough people and they don't have enough time. SentinelOne, as an example, has placed a huge amount of emphasis on, can we make someone who has X years experience as able to deal with a complex threat as someone who has 20. One example of that is if you go and look at the MITRE website, the EDR testing that MITRE do, you'll see every single decent vendor have what they tout as 99 or 100% coverage. But if you look one level deeper, you'll start seeing an interesting thing, which for some vendors, 100% coverage means 150 alerts. So MITRE tested something, same thing for every single vendor, and they evaluated what they saw. They didn't actually call out how many things that manifested as. And how many things it manifests as is analyst time, because you have to look at every single alert. You have to remediate, in theory, every single alert, and you go 1, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4, and then 5, and so on and so forth, until you get to 150. For SentinelOne, it was 8. Same coverage, same level of security, but from an analyst perspective, there were only 8 things to look at. And that's thanks to a lot of emphasis that we place on correlation, on contextualization, on how we visualize what we see. And that means that someone looking at the same threat in the same company, for whatever reason, they have both SentinelOne and something else installed, the person looking at SentinelOne would have dealt with it at least 7x. The closest number to us was 56. Most of the vendors were many more. Again, same attack, same coverage. But that's an example of how you can force a vendor to prove to you that they are doing things that would help someone with fewer years experience, or maybe a smaller team, solve the problem better. And finally, and this is perhaps a slightly more specific problem, everyone hates their SIM. It's too expensive, it's too difficult to put data in. And not every customer needs a SIM. Not everyone has, whether it's a compliance need to store all of their cyber data for a year or 7 years. And not everyone has interest in hunting or investigating. But for those that do, SIM usually means an absolute nightmare, both to your bank account and to dealing with it on a daily basis. And we're all creating much more data than we used to. So being able to solve that problem at higher performance with better scale, and I know that you could either take my word for it or say that I'm lying, the price point would be lower. And that's also based on technology. For someone offering, if you go to a vendor, say, I have, I don't know, 6 terabytes a day of stuff that I want to put in to a big data lake. I almost said data trash cans because I'm living in America and my English is starting to go. There's a cost aspect. It's a very simple thing. It's also something you could force a vendor to prove. Ignore all of the marketing and cyber buzzwords and bullshit. At the end of the day, there's a price that they're going to attach to taking in a certain amount of data, and there are vendors that you could ask them to prove what it is that they mean when they're saying that they're helping you and making you more efficient. And you could be looking at all of these metrics, but most vendors actually don't talk about them. They don't, or maybe if they do, they don't actually focus on proving them. So obviously, I'm not the only person talking about XDR. There are many types of vendors. Some are vendors that have one of everything and have now started calling it XDR. Vendors like Cisco, IBM, Palo Alto Networks, they've either bought or developed one of almost every single cyber product on the planet, and they've now wrapped it in a nice ribbon and call it XDR. There are other vendors that are only looking at it from a data perspective. Vendors that used to be SIM or were about to call themselves SIM and then saw that XDR was coming out and changed the name. Sadly, most of them have nothing to do with response. They have the data, but they can't do anything about it. And then you have EDR vendors, best of breed EDR vendors that are evolving outwards. We are not the only one. There is another large one called CrowdStrike that is also evolving in a similar direction, each with our own approaches. But there is a point there, and we'll talk about that more in a few seconds, which is, has a vendor managed to prove that it can help detection and response on at least one surface? Sort of all of the vendors that are talking about it and saying, we have solved XDR, many of them have never, not everything, but solved it on one, be it endpoint or network or clouds. And the EDR vendors have. They have managed to make an impact on their customers' day-to-day lives of getting the data in, detecting bad things, investigating them, responding to them, potentially correlating them. Yes, on endpoint, but at least it's a proof point that they have the tech to do it on one thing. And expanding from one to many is much easier than going from 0 to 1. And then you have obviously SIM and SOAR vendors that have combined. So these are vendors that with a SOAR do have the ability to react. But like I said at the very beginning, if that was enough, I wouldn't be here. We'd be talking about something else and not about XDR, because if SIM and SOAR was the answer, you put all of your data in and you automate everything, XDR would never have been born. And finally, it's something which is critical to mention. Managed services have been doing this for a while. If you're a ReliaQuest or a Red Canary or any one of the very good MDRs out there, and you're a customer of theirs, you don't care. It could be a hamster running around in a wheel correlating things, and you get the outcome. So it's a critical thing to note that someone looking for a better solution to dealing with all of their products, MDR is a very viable approach. There are pros and cons, which we won't get into today. But even for SentinelOne, we recognize that that's critical. That's why most of the large MDRs on the planet use SentinelOne. Red Canary, Blue Voyant, ReliaQuest, AT&T, Critical Star, and many others. We are very cognizant that they offer a very compelling option, and we work with them to make them feel comfortable enough to use SentinelOne as the platform through which they deliver security to others. But again, in many cases, the customer doesn't care. They trust the MDR is choosing the right things, the right approaches, the right tech, and it's definitely a viable approach for arguably one of the more complex problems in cyber today, dealing with all of your products, creating insight from all of them, etc. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are many, many promises. Force the vendors to prove it. Force the vendors who come to you with something very interesting and sounding cool to prove what it is that they are doing that will make you 50% faster or will make it 30% lower cost of ownership, and so on and so forth. Not enough vendors do. It's very easy to put a quote on a PR saying that some new technology is doing this and curing cancer, but start forcing them to prove it. It's probably the most effective thing, and in many cases, many vendors like to have that level of conversation. Now, we spoke about, I won't go into this in too much detail. This is essentially what I was talking about with a vendor that can prove that it can do or solve this problem, at least on one surface. And it could be that you're talking to a vendor who solved it on network or who solved it on cloud. In our case, naturally, it's on endpoint. But from my experience, there hasn't really been an equivalent vendor that has, or rather an equivalent market in cyber that's focused on a specific surface that can prove that the idea of getting lots of data in, applying detection to it, facilitating investigation, and accelerating response, EDR is pretty much the only one that has gradually evolved in the past few years into doing that. And that's why there are many people saying that XDR has to start with a core, fundamental, best-of-breed EDR. Now, obviously, I'm slightly biased, so one could argue differently. But this is sort of an example of what it's doing, which is, I'm not sure how well you can see it, but with EDR, it's one of the largest data sources in cyber. Oh, sorry, endpoint is one of the largest data sources. SentinelOne today on endpoint is collecting trillions and trillions of events from our customers every day. No one's actually looking at all of that data. That data is being translated into maybe hundreds of suspicious things that then gets translated into maybe just a handful of things worthy of an analyst to look at and respond to. And that's exactly what XDR is claiming to solve, not for endpoint, but for everything. And that's why looking at what the fundamental technical pillars are is important. The second myth, which is often confused with XDR, is that it's just SIM 2.0 or next-gen SIM or something along those lines. But it's not. The idea of what XDR brings to the table is solving the problems that SIM couldn't. SIM was never built for security. It's a data lake that was built for event management that security was added on top of it. It doesn't inherently offer detection capabilities. You can write rules on it. That's pretty much it. It doesn't inherently offer response. You can potentially also buy the SOAR that some SIM vendors have. It was never built to be used by everyone. SIM query languages are notoriously difficult to learn, complex, unflexible, etc. And SIM was never built to take into account that security data is larger than everything else, and in some cases needed for longer. And that's why the bills coming from vendors like Splunk, QRadar, and so on and so forth are in some cases in the tens of millions. That's what it costs to buy a SIM and put 50 terabytes of data into it a day and store it for 3 years. And that's just because, in A, everything is about money, but B, the SIMs can't offer it for less, otherwise they'd go bankrupt. And that's why there are technologies that are more security-centric that do have an option to offer that for something that makes sense. And there are many, many other differences, and obviously it seems I've screwed up my slide, and there is something in that order. Like I was saying, there are comparisons. For example, SIM was never built to be cloud native. Most SIMs started as on-prem things, and for customers looking to move everything into the cloud, many SIMs aren't built for what they need. We talked about the use cases. SIMs do cyber. Like, it's not that they don't offer, in some cases, a solution to certain use cases, but it's in this order. It starts with compliance, maybe some reporting, maybe some rule-based detection. And to be clear, this isn't a pitch saying throw out your SIM and put an XDR in. It's a conversation about if you are looking to solve the XDR-oriented problems that we were talking about earlier, SIM isn't necessarily the answer. SentinelOne will happily work if someone has a SIM that they are happy with for compliance and for reporting, etc. It's not something which is an either-or. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. And that's also something which I would highly recommend thinking about is this vendor talking about the outcomes that you care about? Is this vendor talking about the use cases that you actually have, as opposed to trying to force a platform that they own, that they would like to replace everything you currently have? There are many other technical pieces as well. Sort of getting the data in to a SIM is often very difficult and requires a lot of people, and it's very labor intensive, but that's not what every cybersecurity team needs. They need an easy way to push, whether it's a little or a lot of data, into this platform. Again, but that's just a means to an end. Many of you, depending on your current roles, may think that this is all in way too tactical. It's in the details, and the technical comparison between one platform and another is indeed irrelevant. This is just a way of unpacking slightly why SIMs have struggled to achieve the outcomes of making detection and response across many products better than it is today. Now, finally, automation is also something that gets discussed a lot in cyber, and it's scary. Many customers that I've spoken to, large and small, are apprehensive about a vendor telling them that they have the power to automate everything. Whether because it's being scared of false positives or being scared of something which was a true positive but was actually okay because whatever. And it's true. I myself don't think that writing a playbook for every single thing in your security environment is a good idea, but making it automatable is. You should be able to easily pick and choose what it is that you feel confident enough to auto-respond to. If you know that if someone touches something, come what may, that user should be terminated in Okta, absolutely, or ping, or whatever it is, absolutely go for it. But it should start with you feeling confident enough about the efficacy, and it should start with you feeling confident enough about the flexibility that you have to determine what happens, when it happens, how many times should it happen, on what should it happen, maybe just on these users and not on others. So automation is definitely something that should be taken into account, but it should be second nature. It shouldn't be based around writing a very complex playbook that then translates into automation. You should be able to click on something on a screen if you see an alert that you indeed believe in. Next time I want it to be automated. That should be this flow around automation in cybersecurity, much more cause and effect than cause and cause and cause and if and if and if and then and that, because life changes and continuously maintaining these playbooks is usually impossible, which is why, by the way, when people buy automation platforms, the most common playbook is when an alert happens, send it to Slack or send it to the ticketing system. That's usually, despite what people think about in a POC with a big, complex automation platform, they don't use it. They don't use it because it's too difficult to maintain. They don't use it because it's too difficult to configure. They don't have enough people. They forgot this API and so on and so forth. And that's why automation should be very easy. It should be within your existing workflows. Automation is a means to an end. You don't get a prize for having lots of playbooks. Maybe you do, but that's sort of customer dependent. And that's why we're not afraid of automation, but we use it as a means to an end in our workflows. I'll skip that. I'd say the last piece is data related. You heard me talk about how much data costs and how much you need. XDR doesn't require all of your data. It can if you need it to have all of your data, but a vendor should be able to offer you XDR value, meaning correlating across products, meaning utilizing the response action of one product based on another product's alert, without telling you that you must give them every single event that you have and replacing your SIM. It's why at SentinelOne we offer 2 tracks of XDR. One is completely free. Every SentinelOne EDR customer can connect their other products, and if we see a lateral movement threat, we will automatically enrich it with whatever their identity product said about it. If we see a lateral movement threat, we will automatically enable them to trigger a response action in Zscaler or Okta or Ping or whatever. Notice I haven't mentioned the word terabyte, gigabyte, hunt, compliance. We offer that too, but XDR should be a means of solving what someone's problem is. And someone may not have a problem of compliant and storing every single security log for 7 years. Someone may be very happy with it, whatever they're using for data lake. And that's why it's the same platform. It's not one screen for this and another screen for something else, but there are multiple tiers based on multiple types of use case. And finally, sort of we arrive at the slightly blurred SentinelOne architecture. It's evolved a lot in the past. Many of you may only know, if at all, SentinelOne as an endpoint company. And SentinelOne has evolved tremendously, both before we went public last year and after. I'd say mainly in 3 ways. First, our EDR became arguably the best EDR on the planet. Whether that's what MITRE say, whether that's what some of the analyst vendors say, and more importantly, the fact that every large incident response vendor and every large managed detection and response vendor now uses that EDR to run its business. And in all honesty, that's much, much more neutral and objective than anything I would be telling you, since I have a vested interest in you thinking that SentinelOne is the best EDR on the planet. They don't. They need to sell to their customers, whether it's Mandiant or Arete or Kroll or KPMG or Red Canary or Blue Voyant or ReliaQuest, etc., and they're using SentinelOne instead of anything else. The EDR, we learned a lot. We learned how to deal with data. We learned how to correlate. We learned how to facilitate automation. But most importantly, a year and a half ago, we also replaced our data engine at the bottom. And it has been completely migrated. So every SentinelOne customer is now running on top of it. That data engine is what enables us to ingest anything. We bought a company called Scalar. We replaced our backend. And to be clear, it's not that our existing customer base is on the old one and everyone else or new is on the new one. Every single SentinelOne customer is benefiting from it for whatever use case that they need, whether it's endpoint, whether it's clouds, whether it's identity, etc. Another thing you'll notice is that there is this sort of list of products that we offer, but also the marketplace at the bottom. We don't care which of our products you use versus things that you bring to the table. We want to make sure that whatever you have and like, we can utilize. So you could buy endpoint from us and cloud from Palo. You could go the other way and buy cloud from us and endpoint from Palo, and so on and so forth. We will never force anyone into buying exclusively SentinelOne, and if they don't get XDR. We will work with anything. And I think that's dramatically helped our ability to present ourselves more as a platform than as an endpoint product alone. And finally, we offer services for everything. So whether you're looking at us or looking at another services provider, we will support it. In all honesty, we don't talk about that enough, but it is definitely something that more and more people are turning to. And I think I'll spare you that. And I'll spare you the sales pitch at the end. Whether you go with SentinelOne or not, I think the main focus should be on having a vendor prove what it is you need to do, what it is, how they're helping you, whether it's speed, cost, efficiency, people, and so on and so forth. If you have any questions, I'll be here. Thank you.